Hey guys, Kyle Bascombe here. Today we are doing a DIY transmission fluid service on this 2007 Mercedes C280 4MATIC. With it being a 4MATIC, it has the older Mercedes 5-speed transmission, the 722.6. That's the transmission that's found in vehicles as early as 1996 in like the SL models, all the way up to like 2012 or so if you had an S-Class with the big twin-turbo V12. So, in terms of why we're performing this service, it's something we recommend every 40 to 60,000 miles in order to extend the life of your transmission. When these transmissions were originally engineered, they were termed as lifetime fill. What we're finding in real life is that the fluid needs to be replaced periodically in order to extend the life of the transmission. All right, so now that you know what we'll be doing today, let's go over the products that you're going to need for the job. We've got the recommended fluid for the 7226 from Liqui-Moly, which is the TopTech 1600. What you'll notice here is we've got a couple of more bottles of fluid than your normal drain and fill, because we're going to be removing as much fluid from the transmission as possible today. Additionally, we have the OE Filtran filter here. We also have the pan gasket, which needs to be replaced each time. We have the OE fill plug with the O-ring, the locking pin, which is almost never on a vehicle that's been serviced in the past, and we've got the washer for the oil drain plug. So, all of these products can be found on our website, fcpeuro.com, as individual items or in kit form. Now that you know the products we're going to use for the job today, let's talk about the tools that are needed for the job. So these are the tools you're going to need for the job. For this transmission fill, we use the CTA 7650 tool. Our reason behind using it is trying to get as much transmission fluid out of this transmission as possible. And it's very helpful in cases where you don't have a torque converter drain. We've got our dipstick tool here, and the purpose of this tool is to measure the transmission fluid level. From the factory, the dipstick tube is capped, but it does not have a dipstick. So you're going to need this guy to verify the fluid level. It's always good to have a can of solvent or brake clean around. We used it just to clean up the bottom of the transmission pan and some of the fasteners. Torque wrench is essential, so we've got a 3/8 drive torque wrench. And then 5mm hex for the oil drain, T30 for the bolts around the perimeter of the trans, 1/4-inch ratchet for that T30, but one that's a little bit longer to give you more leverage, just to break free bolts that haven't moved around in a while. We've got a pick. Sometimes the pick is handy for removing the copper crush washer if it gets stuck to the pan. And then lastly, we have a flexible small funnel because the transmission is filled from the top. So now that you know the tools that we're going to be using for the job, let's jump right in. All right, so we're under the vehicle, just identifying where we're going to be working today. This is the transmission pan that we're going to be draining at this oil drain plug. There are 6 bolts around the perimeter of the pan. The pan is held against the body of the transmission with these stands. You'll see when I pull it off. And then in reference to draining the torque converter, that's your access hole at the bell housing for the torque converter. So there are a lot of 7226 models that have a small transmission torque converter drain. And if that's the case, you can rotate the engine, you'll see the plug, and then you can remove it to drain the extra 2 liters or so out of the torque converter to get the full system drained. There are also some models that don't have a drain. So in that instance, we're going to show you the CTA 7650 tool that you can use that plugs right into the valve body and allows you to drain the additional fluid out. So we're just going to start with the basics first. Just going to crack all of these bolts lightly to make sure, kind of to figure out if we're going to have a good day or like a really bad day. As you can tell when you're looking at this oil drain, this pan is kind of rusty in this area, so might give it a little trouble to come out. This is a 5mm hex on a 1/4-inch drive tool. As you can tell, it took a lot of force to crack that one, but it cracked. That's all I need to confirm. I'll just spin that back so fluid's not dripping on me like while I'm working. I'm going to crack all of these other bolts around the perimeter of the pan. This is a T30 that I'm using. These bolts are normally torqued down 8 Newton meters. All right, so I'm just going in there by hand, spinning this guy off. There we are. While this is draining, I am going to start removing some of the fasteners around this transmission. So, what I was referring to before, 2 parts to this story. We have the bolt, and then we have this stand that helps to locate the pan of the transmission against the body. So what I'm trying to avoid is tipping this pan forward, dumping the fluid everywhere. I'm going to attempt to show you what's in the pan after draining it. As you can see, quite a lot still in there, so just be careful. So that's like another half of a liter or so that we just drained out from the pan. So I'm going to get the pan on this cart or somewhere else. We'll clean out the magnet, we'll clean out the pan, we'll get a new gasket on there. All right, so as you can see, the valve body is still dripping. The next item we need to remove is the filter. When we remove the filter, which sometimes is a little hard to kind of break that O-ring pressure and remove from the valve body, but when we remove that, we're going to get some more fluid coming out of this transmission. So we're going to go a little higher with this guy. I'm just going to get in there. There we go. So dumping fluid out of the filter, and as you noticed, more fluid comes out of the valve body. So this is the 7650 tool that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. First thing I want to note, it does require air pressure. Most DIYers at home, you might have a pancake compressor or similar that you use to like air up your tires. That's more than sufficient for what we're doing here today. And instead of running a line across the shop, that's exactly what I'm going to use as well. This fitting is going to go into the valve body of the transmission, exactly where the filter would normally go. This screw is going to retain it just to make sure it stays where it needs to stay. This air release valve is going to thread into the fitting. So you can control the air pressure that's going into the transmission. And then this is going to be your interface with the compressor. So now that you know what we're going to be doing, I'm going to take everything over to the transmission and we will continue. So many owners are going to be very concerned with getting the largest volume of old transmission fluid out as possible. You really only have 2 options. The first is if your transmission is equipped with a converter drain, spin the engine until you see the drain, drain it out. That gets the largest volume of transmission fluid out. Your second option is also to do a normal drain and fill, drive the vehicle for a period of time, short period of time, drain it out again, and refill the transmission. That should get about 80% or more of the old fluid volume out of the transmission. All right, so we are pretty much finished draining the transmission. As you can see, it's just a drip or 2 here and there coming out of the transmission, out of the valve body. So now I'm going to get set up to use the CTA fitting to pressurize this transmission. First thing we're going to do is remove one of the screws in the valve body. Now I'm going to pop the fitting in. CTA does provide their own screws with each of these fittings. However, I just prefer to use the screw that I removed from the valve body. So I'm just sending that back in. If we're being honest, the O-ring seals well enough that you really don't need the fastener. But that is how this kit is engineered to be used, so that's what we're going to do today. We've got our air release valve that we're going to thread in. This has an O-ring to seal. And then, similar to what you would have at home, like a pancake compressor, that's what I'm going to use here. I've got the air regulated to the pressure they recommend on their instruction sheet. So on the sheet that comes, the instruction sheet that comes with it, they recommend about 1/2 kilogram. So just get that set up on your gauge. I'm going to open the release valve. Now, as you can see, draining everything out of the transmission. So we're going to let it do its thing for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, so this is the part where things get a little bit dirty. First thing I'm going to do is take the magnet out of the pan. Easier said than done. What you're looking for is the kind of metal on the magnet that kind of just crushes in your hand. If you've got a lot of spiky bits that are pointing up or something like that, you could have internal mechanical wear in that transmission that requires addressing by a professional. But this magnet looks good, and the material that's on the magnet feels the way that it should. So I've just got a blue shop towel, get my hands dirty. If you're doing it, wear gloves. And just cleaning this off. So that's really nice and clean now. I'm going to leave this here on the blue shop towel. And now I'm going to focus on cleaning up the transmission pan. So I'm going to remove the old gasket. And I've got some towels here. I'm just wiping down the interior of the pan. I've drained as much fluid as I can out of this pan, and now I'm just trying to do the last bit of cleanup. All right, so the interior of the pan really doesn't have any more fluid in it. It's really nice and clean. I am going to run a towel around the exterior of the pan as well, just to make sure that when I seat that gasket, it seats nice and flush. And now I'm just placing the new gasket around the perimeter of the pan. Get the magnet back in the front of the pan. Now the pan's all set. We're going to go remove the equipment from the valve body of the transmission, and we'll put the pan back on. Okay, so we're going to start disconnecting all of the hardware that's related to pressurizing this transmission. Remove this. Remove our valve. Then we'll remove the fastener from the valve body. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but the procedure we're doing on this 5-speed, this fitting will also fit the 7-speed transmissions. So if you have a 7-speed that doesn't have the converter drain, you can also use that fitting, this fitting for that. All right, so the next step is we're going to install the filter into the valve body. I'm just applying firm pressure and just pushing up. That's all that's required to get the filter back in. All right, so now what I'm doing is I've placed 2 of the stands on either side of the transmission pan. You can probably see it here. And there's one on the other side. And that's just to help me get things started a little faster. Just getting 1 bolt threaded in on either side of the pan. All right, now that those 2 bolts are threaded in, we'll go around the perimeter of the pan. So the only stand that's unique is the one that also forms as the stand for the electrical connector shield. So just look out for that and make sure that it ends up in this corner. So we're going to consult with our service manual verify that it is in fact 8 Newton meters, and then we'll torque everything down. Now I'm removing the drain plug with that 5mm hex. I've reset the tool to 20 Newton meters. It's a very reassuring click. All right, in terms of working under the vehicle, we're pretty much done. I am going to leave the shields off because I'll refill the transmission. I might glance at the pen just to make sure that everything's nice and dry. But we're going to get the vehicle on the floor, and I'll show you how to fill it from the top, as this transmission fills from the top, unlike a lot of the more modern Mercedes where you fill from the bottom. All right, so these transmissions, as I already mentioned, they get filled from above. The way this guy works is there's a dipstick tube over here. From the factory, there's actually a locking pin that goes in this tube because, as I mentioned, Mercedes was marketing these as a lifetime fill. Really didn't want anyone going in there to add fluid, check anything, etc. Most of these cars that I deal with already have the locking pin broken off, so I can just remove the cap that's on the dipstick tube. But if you have one that isn't broken, there's going to be a red tab that extends. Just break it off, and then you can remove this cover over the dipstick tube. What I've got in order to fill this transmission, just a flexible funnel deal so that I can stick it behind here, behind the air box, and it goes right into the tube nicely. Funnel is secure in our dipstick tube. Liquid moly bottles are pretty cool in that they have this spout so that you don't spill everything everywhere. Super convenient. So we're going to do that 6 more times. Normally, when I use the CTA 7650 tool, the transmission takes about 7 liters of fluid, but we're going to start with 6. Run the transmission through the gears, see where the level's at, and then top it off if we need to. So I just finished refilling the transmission with about 6 liters of fluid. I am going to remove this funnel. Here we are. Got a little aggressive when I was filling one of the bottles and I squeezed it, so I'm just going to wipe down the side of the dipstick tube where I spilled a little bit of transmission fluid. It's actually not too bad. And for now, because I'm going to cycle the transmission through the gears and I'm going to need to check the fluid level, I'm going to check it cold first just to get a rough idea of if I'm in the right spot. I'm just going to pop this old cap over the dipstick tube. Okay, so I'm going to start this vehicle, cycle it through the gears a couple of times, leave the car on, and use the dipstick tool to check the fluid level. So we checked the fluid level cold. Fluid level looked a little bit high. I just went for a drive to get the transmission up to operating temperature. A couple of minutes drive. We're back in the shop. I'm going to check the fluid level now. So I'm just removing the old cap. Getting that to the bottom of the sump, it just hit the bottom. So just to see the fluid level, car feels great. The fluid level is where it should be. I'm going to add just about a half a liter more to this transmission, and we're going to call it a wrap. So in summary, when you're using the CTA 7650 to drain more fluid out of the transmission, although our kit contains 5 liters of fluid, just grab 2 extra liters of fluid if you're going to do that. I'm going to add the half liter and then show you how to cap it off. So these genuine dipstick tube caps that we offer, this is your cap for the tube. It has the O-ring to seal it correctly. So your first step is going to be setting that guy in there, making sure it sits nice and flush on the tube. And then you have your locking pin, which I'm going to press in there now. This is the orientation. And then I'm just pulling up lightly to make sure that the cap is locked in place. So it's like a locking pin to prevent anyone from tampering and adjusting the fluid. But like I said at the beginning of the video, you just break the tab off and you can lift the cap off the dipstick tube. So there you have it. We just finished our transmission fluid service on this 5-speed transmission. As you can see, it really is a super simple DIY job. We went the additional step of just pressurizing the valve body to get a little more fluid out. By all means, you don't have to do it, but it is a good practice just to get as much fresh fluid in the system as possible. If you have any questions at all, be sure to leave them in the comments below, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.